Welcome to the Cafe Culture Podcast, a season of discussions on culture, politics, philosophy and science.
Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope everyone can hear me. If any time you can't, then do gesticulate in the nicest possible fashion. So thank you very much for coming out. I had written out on such a chilly evening, but the weather's perked up a bit, hasn't it, which was grand. Those of you who've heard me talk before will know I usually natter on about housing, but I thought this evening I'd do something completely different. Well, not entirely different, because what I want to talk about is growing older and what that means in an aging society. Now, I'm not here pretending that I've got all the answers, far from it, but I'm hoping that you, like me, have given this growing older business a bit of thought. We commonly say, don't we, that getting older is better than the alternative. But if you think about it, does that mean that the only thing worse than getting older is being dead? And in fact, is that how we think about it? And we might want to think about that a little later on. Confession time. I'm going to be 65 next birthday, and I'm one of the masses of people who are turning 65. And I think we can reasonably expect, can't we, to live into our 80s and maybe beyond. There are loads of centenarians out there, and you're probably aware that Hallmark, who are the world's biggest makers of greetings cards, 100 cards, the card for 100 is their fastest growth area. So in the past, you might have gone into a shop and asked for such a card and been told, oh, well, we don't get a lot of call for that one. But in fact, now you're more likely to be told that they've sold out. So, there's a lot of people living a very long time. At present, we get a telegram from the Queen. In fact, she'll be sending herself one soon, won't she? Which will be a bit odd. And I think we also get one from the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, which probably says something like, are you still here drawing this money? Honestly, what is this? Now, for the future, of course, we might get a text. Wow, 100, love, Will and Kate. Or perhaps, maybe we'll get nothing at all because, hey, 100, what's special about it when so many people are 100? The truth is that each of us will grow old if we're lucky. What goes for individuals, I think, also holds for countries. Most countries are seeing one of the most profound changes of the century, with populations of over 60s outnumbering those of children. Now, there are massive shifts of different kinds coming our way: climate emergency and global geopolitics. And we don't know how London will cope when water levels will rise, and we don't know how strife in the Middle East and sadly too many other areas in the world will resolve itself. But we do know which countries are aging most rapidly, and within them, which subpopulations are likely to live longer lives and which will not reap the benefits because of inequalities. And we can see that in our own country. But back to me. So I'm nearly 65, and I must admit I swing between two positions. One is, how can I be 65? A friend of mine whose husband is 10 years her senior told me in a horrified voice when he was 65, I'm sleeping with a pensioner, she said. How did that happen? My other position is, how can I, Rose Gilroy, small but feisty, how can I be 65 when inside I'm just a girl? Now, given that I'm not imminently retiring, and him indoors will be 67 this month, neither of us are retiring, neither of us are going to be sleeping with a pensioner anytime soon. And given that we both might live, God willing, another 20 or 30 years, what is it about these numbers that causes such hang-ups? What is it about 65 and the other numbers, the ones with the naught on the end, even ones like 30? I was having a look at Vogue today, not one of my usual reads, I must admit, And it was Emma Watson, who was about to be 30, saying, oh, well, when you're going to be 30, you expect to have found the right person and had a baby and all of this. And you think, oh, God, does this pressure, when does it start and does it never end? By this age, you must have, and you really ought to have, and if you haven't, what's wrong with you? So for each age, there seems to be a whole lot of baggage and a set of expectations. And this, of course, gets us down to one of the perhaps intriguing issues about identity in later life, what's called the mask of aging. The idea that our sense of self, what makes me, me, and what makes you, you, is something inside. That's the real you. So middle-aged, whatever that is, and older people are encouraged to feel themselves as permanently young, but being betrayed, if you want, by aging bodies and faces. And in spite of an aging population, we still have a youth culture that makes us vulnerable to this fantastic allure of cosmetics and exercise, pills, non-surgical and surgical procedures. There's a new magazine out called Platinum, and I thought, I'm going to have a look at this. And it was quite hopeful, but one of the articles is fillers, tweakments or surgery, and you think, oh my God. Anyway, just to, according to the British Association of Aesthetic Plastic Surgeons, over 28,000 cosmetic procedures took place in the UK over the last year, and no surprise, women underwent 92% of those. We might find out later whether anybody's had a little bit of work done, and if not, are they thinking about it? Is it on your Christmas list? So, what we're being asked to do is something which is intensely paradoxical. We're trying to aim at being ageless so we can grow old successfully by denying and resisting aging. And for women, these matters, I think, are much more pressing because of the inflated role that beauty and appearance plays in defining a successful woman. Older women are celebrated when they don't look their age. The Guardian last year, and I wish on earth I'd kept it, but good intentions, they ran a feature on Jane Fonda, who was 80 at the time. And the cover photograph on the magazine showed an almost unlined face. The fusion of several facelifts, which she admits to, and no doubt the airbrushing that the media culture imposes on celebrities. Now, I'm delighted that Jane Fonda looks so much younger. But what, in fact, does it say about getting old? That it's something fearful, that it's something ugly. We're bombarded with adverts for face creams because we're worth it. And yes, of course, they are the market leader. And according to 2019 statistics, the anti-aging beauty product market is worth $50.2 billion, yes, billion dollars. That's a powerful amount of money. We could end world poverty, clean up the planet, eliminate several nasty diseases and transform our world. But instead, what we're doing is, as Joni Mitchell says, who is 75, by the way, we are in pursuit of these vain promises on beauty jars. And we might remember the old song, keep young and beautiful. It's your duty to be beautiful. Keep young and beautiful if you want to be loved. I didn't sing it for you because I would have cleared the room faster than a fire alarm, but is that true? Is old unattractive? Is beauty about youth, sexual attractiveness, and fertility? And when we say we don't feel old, are we actually saying we don't feel ugly? While older people are an enormous group, business has really failed to connect with the new us, except to make us believe we can turn back the clock. There was a 60-country survey recently, and 30,000 respondents stated that they don't see advertising that reflect older consumers. Where we are portrayed, it is usually unappealing and overtly stereotypical. Now, I enjoy classic crime drama, so I often record David Suchet's Hercule Poirot, which is currently on ITV3. And this programme is punctuated by adverts for plans for the over 50s and funeral plans that will leave something a bit over for your family. So is death all we have to look forward to? That and keeping the lines at bay. And it may be that this lack of action is because actually people don't know who we are. In those little tick boxes in marketing surveys, the last box tends to stop at 65. And presumably beyond that, there's very little point in inquiring about our preferences because we're all the same. We are the elderly, God help us. We're all the same. So I hope you realize I am in my last few months of being a unique adult, and after February I'm going to be submerged in a group condemned to beige, curly perm and a blue rinse. The elderly. In fact, my friend Barbara here recently had a weekend in Bournemouth and was advised by many people to avoid getting the blue rinse, which was clearly a hazard of Bournemouth. So, if later life is presented in such narrow and unattractive terms, is it any wonder that we run to the jar of cream or the surgeon's knife? If ageism is so rife, no wonder we try to deny our age and take refuge in the notion of ageless self. I was rereading a paper recently about large age-segregated developments in the US that began with Sun City, Arizona in the 50s. And I thought, well, you can't expect me to talk and not mention housing, otherwise you'll forget it's me. So I had to mention it in a bit. So these developments, if you look at the adverts, they're pitching this ageless self. The images of fun, new identities, romance, ever-renewed vigor and energy. People who will never become disabled or suffer cognitive decline. People who will never lack a hand to hold as they walk along the shore. So are these adverts, are these destinations, are these ideas, are they to be applauded or are they to be derided? We might say that to be alive is to change, and to not change is to be dead. However, if society is ageist and continues to denigrate old age, then why not try to escape? Is criticizing such positive views, in fact, just a new form of ageism? If negative images of older people are ageist and positive images of older people are ageist, then is it possible to have a non-ageist thought in our current society? We might want to unpick that later. Of course, at some point in our life, we might become a national treasure. Now, I Googled what are the criteria for a national treasure, and it seems to be that you've got to be famous and probably getting on in years. Jimmy Savile was described as a national treasure when he died, and I think we'd all agree we got that one badly wrong. But on much safer ground, Dame Barbara Windsor, perhaps more so now that she has developed dementia. Sir Billy Connolly, again perhaps more valued since the onset of Parkinson's disease. And maybe there's something about people who are in the public eye, who are national treasures, being seen to confront awful things, which might in fact happen to any of us or those people that we love. So in some ways, do they in fact become a focus, perhaps almost role models that we can think about? These people, obviously with considerably more financial resource than most of us, how are they coping? How do they work through, if you can be described as working through, these terrible diseases? And of course, still physically and intellectually able, Sir David Attenborough, And indeed, Her Majesty the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh proving that in your 90s you can be cognitively intact and still working. So we don't all get dementia, and science proves that. So how much of our denial of aging is actually based on fear, and how much of our fear actually is unfounded? So if we're not old enough or famous enough to be a national treasure, then what we become is a pensioner and a burden. We are part of the Agequake that will bring economies of the world crashing down. Greedy geezers who've stolen the future of young people. We are damned if we continue to work because we're taking jobs from the young. And we're damned if we retire because we're leeching off the overburdened young. Research, by the way, in Ireland from my colleague, Professor Tom Scharf, has shown considerable intergenerational financial and in-kind support from older people to younger people, helping younger people through some tough times. The financial crash was particularly severe in Ireland and ruinous for those people who just become homeowners. And indeed, closer to home, any casual inquiry into UK first-time buyers shows that just under 50% of the considerable deposits put down come from legacies, so we can imagine the passing away perhaps of grandparents, or gifts from family. We can imagine equity release from parents or grandparents digging into their own housing wealth. Not to mention the £22.5 billion, which is older people's donation to the economy from babysitting, saving our children from childcare fees, and indeed allowing those people to contribute to the economy through whatever they do and through the payment of taxation. So if all of that is the case, how did we become the fall guys for neoliberal capitalism? Were we just an easy target? And even more insidious narrative is the emerging one, tying these kinds of intergenerational economic analyses with voting trends, especially on Brexit. The older people have sold young people's future down the river. So again, we might want to talk about these things later. How did we end up being the fall guy in all of these things? So, is later life different, or is it just a kind of extended middle age? Now, I've had some privileged insight into later life in that I am, as Lucille said, a gerontologist, meaning that my work is with and about older people. And it has been suggested that those who research later life have perhaps a special responsibility to help societies and individuals within it make sense of their own aging, particularly when many people find it hard to imagine their own old age, or are saying, whoa, forget it, this isn't me. So I want to tell you a little bit about a piece of research which I finished a couple of years ago, which was examining common but important life transitions in people aged 55 and over. And it was a qualitative piece of work, so it was depth interviews with people, and then we went back again after 18 months and we interviewed people again. So the transitions were retiring from work, giving up driving, becoming the carer of an adult, taking on grandparenting, starting to live alone, moving house, losing significant degrees of hearing or sight, or starting to use a mobility aid. Now that could be anything from a stick, an assistance dog, one of those rollator things, or a wheelchair, or indeed a mobility scooter. And of course, some people weren't just living their life 2 variables at a time. Some people were contending with a number of these. And I hope you can see that an individual might have very different feelings about most of those. For some people, retirement is bring it on. Yes, let's do it. I can't wait. Whereas for other people, it's bewildering, It's a loss of identity and a loss of status. Several friends of mine have recently retired, and the women all seem to have adjusted, or maybe they're just good at masking it. But some of the men are struggling, feeling bored and wondering how it is that they're going to fill their time. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that men do one thing and women another. That would be wrong. But is it easier for women to retire? Do women have a broader role in the family, in the community? Is it easier for women to volunteer, to give their time into various projects? I think we can see that in the far past, when paid work was very gendered, married women tended to stay at home, and then you had your babies, and then you were caring, and men went out to waged work. We can see then that the transition to retirement for men, in some cases, must have been quite brutal and difficult. But is it still the case? And if so, why? So I think afterwards, I'd like to hear from some gentlemen talking about the road to retirement and what it's been like. Giving up driving, just to look at another transition, for some was met with, oh, thank God for that, because some people had never enjoyed it, they had to do it for their job, or felt increasingly challenged. Others, women and men, suffered an existential crisis, felt that their wings were clipped. They were no longer a person who could go where they wanted, when they wanted. They were tied to public transport or booking taxis or having to, pre-order things. I think we might also agree that anyone can lose their life partner or lose sight or hearing. Indeed, perhaps none of the experiences we explored are necessarily associated with later life, but they may silt up, if you want, in later life, adding complexity, creating new challenges to be met on top of some already faced, such as perhaps health issues, changes in income, and loss of friends. And we may say that there are vulnerabilities in later life that cannot be ignored. As we live longer lives, we are made vulnerable to a greater or lesser extent by illness and disability, while it becomes more likely that our network of loved ones that provide instrumental, emotional, and companionship support may fall to pieces. And I don't think it's ageist to say this. I think it's realistic. So, when investigating old age, I think it's a constant balancing act between understanding a person as having capability, but one affected by limitations, a recording of pleasure and possibility, but also of suffering, and coming to terms eventually with the finitude of life. When this research started, I was 58, so I was chronologically, at least, eligible to be a participant. So I was both an insider and an outsider. I met older people who were inspirational. I met Tess. The names, by the way, are changed. She'd gone through several serious health issues, lost her husband, and was dealing with sight loss and some hearing impairment. But she was a woman who was in love with life. She was socially active, and she had a host of meaningful voluntary work commitments. And when I spoke to her, I was aware that I was thinking that I hoped she would be my model in deep old age, that if I was going to confront those, that I could be her. Every day I wake up, she said, and think I'm alive. She grabbed each day by the throat and shook it, and I thought, wow. When I spoke to her, I thought she was my hero. And I struggled with listening to the stories of those with deteriorating health, for whom there would be no positive transformation. People living with degenerative and incurable conditions, where the research focus simply dragged people back to their struggle. And I wondered if sometimes the research had asked too much of people. I met people who were chronically lonely, who were, if you want, the ghost of Christmas future, encapsulating all my fears of what real late life might be like. Walter was a widower living alone whose daily routine rarely varied. He walked out every day to collect a few groceries and walked home. He had 2 friends, one of whom he rarely saw, and most days he spoke to no one except for shopping or banking transactions. One of the things you tell yourself as a researcher is that the findings will uncover things. They'll shine a light on realities, lead to policy change and new practices and investment. And you've got to be realistic and think, oh, really? Is that always the case? And the answer is not half as often as we would want. But clearly there are desperate and increasing inequalities among older people that would respond to investment, not just in pensions, but in our communities. I think we're all aware of the thinning of communities, the library, the community centre, the different things where an older person might have structured their week around those, giving them things to look forward to and things to talk about with pleasure. And many of that has been sliced through because of austerity. And older people have been victims in that austerity. They have paid the price. But it's naive to suggest that investment and policy change makes everything better. No, it doesn't. So this is Lily. Lily was in her early 90s and was one of the oldest participants. It's a bit frightening when you get to my age, knowing you haven't got very long life. It's frightening. You can imagine, can't you, really? There's no use saying, well, that's okay. It isn't. It's frightening. You think all your friends have gone, and there's nobody else to go before you. You're next. That can be very frightening, especially in the middle of the night. You don't have a right lot of courage. You just have to make a cup of tea. No policy change makes Lily's situation different. And it seems to me that one of the things we need to do is make space in our society and in our lives for deep, meaningful conversation about the big issues. Some years ago, Barbara and I did a series of playing cards. I don't know whether anybody here took part in those workshops. And we challenged ourselves with some tough questions. What happens when it's just me? How do I fill empty days? Things that you don't want to face, but we put them out there for conversation. It seems to me that many of us live on a diet of sugar. We talk about everyday stuff and what's on the telly, but we perhaps fail to have a conversation about the big things of life. How do we transition through this life course? And I think those conversations are overdue, and this might be something we want to do in Newcastle, is give ourselves permission to ask the tough questions and talk about things which are difficult. Because if we're lucky, we're all grown to grow old. So what is this growing older business? Is it a performance of Peter Pan, running after the sweet bird of youth? Or do we value experience, embrace the precious possession that is the years we have lived, the selves we have evolved from, and the selves we are becoming? Can I thank you for your attention?